work, industry, and the working class. There is a sound that America has forgotten to hear. The sound of metal clanging against metal at 5 in the morning, when the sky is still the color of iron. The sound of 1,000 feet descending wooden stairs toward the doors of a factory. The sound, above all, of work. This is the story of how a nation of farmers and artisans transformed itself in little more than a century into the greatest industrial power the world had ever seen. It is the story of the smoke that covered the skies of entire cities, of the wealth that accumulated in the hands of a few, and the blood that was spilled by many. This is the story of the American worker, the one whose name was never engraved in bronze, but whose hands raised every rail, every beam, every brick of the country we know today. At the beginning of the 19th century, America was, above all, a nation of the land. 90 out of every 100 Americans lived off agriculture. Work had the rhythm of the seasons, not the rhythm of a clock. The craftsman worked in his own workshop, in his own time. The blacksmith, the shoemaker, the weaver, men who owned their tools, who answered only to themselves. There was dignity in that, and there were also limits. But thousands of miles away in England, something had already changed forever. Steam engines, mechanical looms, factories that never slept. And America, ambitious, vast, hungry for growth, watched. It was in 1793, on the banks of a river in Rhode Island, that Samuel Slater, an English immigrant who had memorized the secrets of British textile machines, built the first successful spinning mill in the United States. What seemed like a modest undertaking was in fact the first cry of a revolution. No one knew at that moment that that small factory by the water was the harbinger of a transformation that would reorganize not only the American economy, but the very lives of millions of people yet to be born. In 1826, a city that didn't exist 5 years earlier was built in Massachusetts, Lowell. Planned, built, and named after a businessman who would never live to see it completed. A city designed from its foundation for a single purpose, to produce textiles on a scale that America had never imagined. To operate their looms, the factory owners resorted to an unprecedented workforce, young women from the farms of New England. The Lowell girls, as they would become known, worked 13 hours a day, 6 days a week, to the deafening sound of thousands of machines. Many of them saw in this a form of independence never before experienced by an American woman. Their own salary, a life outside their father's farm. But the promise of opportunity hid a new and unforgiving reality. The discipline of the factory. The factory bell, not the sun, now determined when people ate, when they slept, when they worked. For the first time on a large scale, the American worker's time ceased to belong to him personally. In 1834, and again in 1836, when wages were cut, these same young women would do something remarkable. They would stop the machines. Strikes, still timid, still isolated, but the first sign that the American industrial worker would not silently accept any condition imposed upon him. It was only the beginning. After the Civil War, industrial America exploded at a speed unprecedented in human history. Railroads crisscrossed the continent. Blast furnaces roared day and night. Cities grew up around factories as if sprouting from the smoke itself. A new American aristocracy was born from this fire. Men like Andrew Carnegie in steel and John D. Rockefeller in oil amassed fortunes that no European king had ever possessed. The press would call them, with contempt and fascination in equal measure, robber barons. But behind every fortune built in steel and oil was an invisible army, millions of workers, many of them recent immigrants from Ireland, Italy, and Eastern Europe, who fueled the machines with their own bodies. Workdays could reach 12, 14 hours. Wages barely covered the rent for rooms where entire families were crammed together. And accidents, in the mines, steel mills, and railroads, were treated not as tragedies, but as the statistical and acceptable cost of doing business. America was building its greatness, and it was building it, pound by pound, on the backs of those who would never be invited to the mansions that their own sweat had erected. Where there is exploitation, sooner or later, there is resistance. And the final decade of the 19th century would be marked by the most violent confrontations between capital and labor that America had ever seen. In 1877, when railroad companies cut wages for the third time in a year, workers in West Virginia simply stopped working. The strike spread like wildfire along the tracks: Baltimore, Pittsburgh, Chicago, St. Louis. For the first time, an American president would send federal troops to contain his own workers. In Chicago in 1886, during a peaceful rally for the 8-hour workday, a bomb exploded in the crowd. To this day, no one knows for sure who threw it. But the result was immediate: a nationwide wave of repression against unions and labor organizers, and the execution of 4 men whose guilt remains historically contested. 6 years later in Homestead, Pennsylvania, workers at Andrew Carnegie's steel mill clashed with private security guards hired to break their strike. The result: deaths on both sides and a steelworkers' union crushed for a generation. And in 1894, in the company town of Pullman, Illinois, where workers lived in houses rented from the very company that employed them, a wage cut without a corresponding reduction in rent led to a national railroad strike. Again, federal troops, again, blood on the tracks. Each of these strikes would end in the short term in defeat for the workers. But each one planted a seed that repression could never completely uproot. The idea that workers united had power. At the end of a Saturday in March 1911, nearly 500 people, mostly young immigrants, Jewish and Italian, many under 20, were working on the upper floors of a building in Manhattan. It was a few minutes before the end of the workday. A fire started in a basket of fabric scraps. Within minutes, the flames consumed the 8th floor, then the 9th, then the 10th. The doors leading to the fire escapes were locked, a common practice among employers to prevent unauthorized breaks and theft. Emergency exits were insufficient. The elevator stopped working after only a few trips. 146 people died that afternoon. Many of them, seeing that there was no escape, chose to jump from the windows of the 9th and 10th floors rather than surrender to the flames. The crowds in the streets of New York watched, unable to do anything but witness. It was one of the worst industrial tragedies in American history, and it was also a turning point. The public outrage that followed the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire forced what decades of strikes had failed to achieve: a wave of new workplace safety laws in New York State that would become a model for the entire country. Mandatory fire exits, doors that could no longer be locked, occupancy limits, safety inspections. The price for these changes had been paid, pound by pound, in young lives that would never reach 30. Throughout the first decades of the 20th century, the American labor movement ceased to be merely a spontaneous reaction to exploitation and became an organized, permanent political force. The American Federation of Labor, founded in 1886 under the leadership of Samuel Gompers, advocated a pragmatic approach, organizing skilled workers by trade, negotiating directly with employers, and avoiding broader ideological confrontations. But millions of industrial workers, on assembly lines, in steel mills, in mines, didn't fit into specialized trades. For them, in 1935, the Congress of Industrial Organizations, the CIO, was born, aiming to organize workers en masse, skilled or unskilled. It was the Great Depression, paradoxically, that created the political conditions for the greatest victory of the American labor movement. With a quarter of the workforce unemployed and industrial capitalism itself under suspicion, Franklin Delano Roosevelt's government found in supporting workers a tool for national stabilization. In 1935, Congress passed the Wagner Act, guaranteeing for the first time in American federal law the right of workers to organize and bargain collectively. What generations of strikers had won in the streets, at the cost of bloodshed, finally became a right recognized by the state. It was not the end of the struggle. Sit-in strikes in General Motors factories, confrontations in the steel industry, decades of corporate resistance were still to come. But something fundamental had changed. The American worker, for the first time, had the weight of the law on his side. Today, the great textile factories of Lowell are mostly silent. The steel mills that once spewed fire day and night have closed their doors or automated beyond recognition. The classic industrial worker, the one this documentary followed for over a century, has himself become a historical figure. But what these generations of workers achieved did not disappear with the factories. The 8-hour workday, workplace safety laws, the right to organize, the very concept of a weekend. All of this was born from decades of struggle, strikes, and often sacrifice. America likes to tell its story through its great names: presidents, generals, inventors, tycoons. But there is another America, equally essential, that rarely gets a statue: The America that woke before dawn, that operated the machines, that literally erected with its own hands every structure of a country that would become the largest economy on the planet. This America didn't ask to be remembered in bronze. It only asked for what any human being deserves: a fair wage, a safe environment, and the dignity of being heard. And that is why, more than 2 centuries after the first loom spun by a river in Rhode Island, the story of the American worker continues, in every factory, in every warehouse, on every production line that still operates today, somewhere in this vast country.